You must have heard about a project scope statement, but do you actually know when to use it? When is a scope statement critical for the project success? Interesting fact, in 12 years of my career and dozens of projects, I wrote a project scope statement 2 or 3 times. But every time it was a critical success factor for those projects. That's why in this video I will explain when to use a scope statement, why it's important, and what the scope statement typically contains based on an example. Okay, once upon a time I had a project. The goal was to integrate our product with the client's IT infrastructure. The integration is very complex. However, it is the same for each client. So, according to the project charter, the project had a typical scope of work, and the organization has already done several similar projects. But if you take a closer look at this specific client, you will see many unique components that have never been done before. I had a gut feeling that there were many risks involved, so I decided to create a project scope statement to explore additional deliverables we need to develop. So let me ask you this. Do you see a connection between the project charter and the project scope statement? I'm asking because many experienced project managers do not. Let me show you. On the left, we have the list of typical sections of a project charter. And on the right is the list of the typical sections of the scope statement. But let me sort it for you to illustrate the point. Now it's better. First, notice that both documents repeat the project objectives, deliverables, assumptions, and constraints. We need this information to ensure that we operate within the boundaries of our project. Second, we elaborate on two main sections: the scope description and deliverables. So, the project charter has a high-level scope description and a list of deliverables. In the project scope statement, we have detailed scope descriptions and detailed description for each deliverable. And more often than not, you'll have more deliverables in the scope statement than in the project chart. You will probably also elaborate on assumptions and constraints, as well as adding more technical limitations here. So, how does it work in practice? You start with the project chart, then you add project stakeholders who can help you elaborate on high-level requirements and the project's goal. Together, we need to identify more stakeholder requirements, which will dictate what we need to create in order to reach project's objectives. And in other words, what deliverables do we need to produce? Then we put it all in the scope statement, and ideally, project owners need to approve the scope statement. This leads us to a critical conclusion. The project scope statement helps you clearly define the project scope, which will ensure achieving project's objectives. But in what cases do you need to create a formal project scope statement to make it cost efficient and get those benefits? First of all, when you start a project with only a business need, when you don't have a vision of the final product. Second, when you need to adjust the project owner's expectations. For example, they think the project is simple, but you or subject matter experts think the project is much more complex. Third, when your project owners have never done similar projects before. For example, it's the first time they participated in the software development project. This will help you educate and engage key stakeholders in the project. Next, I'll show you an example of the project scope statement, but before we dive in, please click the like button right now. Thank you for participating. Alright, let's assume that we have a project to create this website, and we need to create a homepage with this video going on background, some copy here, some images, buttons, and everything, and another video right here. In addition to that, we also need this kind of pop-up where we can input our name and email address to capture leads. After that, we need also the blog archive, this beautiful archive that leads to all the articles. So, how do we create a project charter for such a project? And how do we write it? So, first of all, it's a simple document, and what I want you to notice right away is that the outline is different from what I showed you previously. So that's lesson number one. Every template that you find on the internet, you must adapt it to the needs of your current project. So don't just take it as is and try to fill out all the fields, all the sections of that template. They might not be applicable for your project. So as you can see, I deleted some sections and I added some sections instead, and I'll explain why. So let's start with the project objective. First of all, the objective of this project is to develop a new website for ITPM School that effectively showcases its offerings and engages visitors. The key goals are to provide an informative and visually appealing homepage, create a blog post, blog archive, and manage and display articles, and implement a pop-up form for user engagement and lead generation. So, first of all, notice how narrative and descriptive this is. I try not to use any technical jargon or terms here. I try to explain what we are going to do. And in general, narrative, simple, easy to understand language beats everything else. Don't try to be smart here. Don't try to cover your back. Don't try to try to confuse your stakeholders with heavy technology that you're going to use. And this is a simple example, but in some cases you will have more complex IT projects with some components that are hard to explain, hard to visualize, and they don't have any user interface. In this case, it's even more important to use simple language. All right, let's move on. Scope description. This project involves designing, developing, and deploying a fully functional website for ITPM School, including the design of the pop-up form. So, here's an important point. This is a very high-level scope description, but do notice that we are naming like all the functions for this project. We will need design, which includes designers, graphic artists, and so on. We have developing, so developers, QAs maybe, and deploying, maybe some DevOps team to automatically deploy the site. So next we go to the next paragraph. The website will include a homepage featuring 2 videos, blog archive to store and display blog posts, and pop-up form to collect user information. So in this paragraph, we are starting to listing out the deliverables that we need to create. And you can think about this part as the main deliverables. So again, first we discussed functions, design, developing, deployment. Now more of the deliverables, website, blog archive, pop-up form, and so on. And another piece of scope here, the project will also ensure that website is responsive, user-friendly, and optimized for search engines. So this is kind of a requirement / additional work that we must perform. And at this time, it's a very high-level stakeholder requirements. We need a responsive design for all types of devices, but we don't have specific designs or specific recommendations or what we need to do to make it responsive. We'll have to collect all those information and only then transform into scope of work, into the tasks we need to perform. All right, next section is project requirements, and this is a deviation from the standard form in most cases, because we kind of collected requirements as the first step, and then we put all the requirements inside the deliverables that we need to create. So in this case, I'm just trying to convey to project owners that we collected and we heard all the requirements that they put on us, just to reiterate it here. And this is the case that I explained before. Our stakeholders in this case are not very technical. So I want to ensure that they feel safe, that we are talking about some scope, deliverables, project objectives, and we still capture the requirements as they provided us, as they said. I'm using their language. And this is just to reiterate what we're going to do. So things like website must be developed using WordPress to allow easy updates and management by TPM school staff. Homepage must prominently feature 2 videos with a play pause functionality. The blog archive must support categorization, tagging, and search. So everything that they said, I put here for the peace of mind. All right, let's move to the main section, project deliverables. And here's the list of all deliverables that we identified so far. So first of all, technical stuff, environments. We need staging environment and production environment that real users will see of our website. We have homepage, which requires design and development and integration of 2 promotional videos. So in this case, we don't know what does the integration mean at this point. We just ensure that we need to put those videos somehow on the website. Blog archive, again, creation of blog archive page, functionality to add, edit, and delete blog posts, and categorization and search functionality for blog posts. Pop-up itself, again, design and implementation of pop-up form, integration with backend system to store user information. So this is something, as you can imagine, it came up during this phase where we collected stakeholder requirements, then we went into the research mode and found out that this form just appears, but later we need to pass this information to some backend system. So responsive design. Again, responsive design is a deliverable. We'll have to hand off this as a feature, as a final product or a version of our product when we implement responsive design requirements. SEO optimization, which stands for search engine optimization. So this is something that happens behind the scenes. You don't see it, but it communicates to Google and other search engines what this page is about. So critical for blog posts. Moving on to acceptance criteria. Here we have something new, which we again not reiterated before. Homepage must load within 3 seconds and display the 2 videos without buffering. So what does it mean? We did some, again, research, or most probably this comes from our expertise as web developers, to say that the best practice is when a website loads, a web page loads within 3 seconds. And we are putting it as an acceptance criteria because that's something we recommended to customers. Next, blog archive must be able to display at least 50 blog posts. So measurable, very specific requirement, because that's something that clients, for example, wanted. They wanted to be sure that when you scroll through the blog, it will show a lot of articles and you don't need to press this next page button or something like that. So next, pop-up must correctly collect and store user data in ConvertKit. So we already identified here that on backend it will be a service called ConvertKit and be compliant with data protection regulations. The website must be fully responsive and pass mobile friendliness tests. Again, something that comes from our expertise, and basically we are putting these acceptance requirements. It's not something that comes from customers. Instead, we are showing our expertise to make customers happy in the end, because after we finish this project, you can imagine that they start using this website, they put a lot of money to create content, just to know that something doesn't work. And they start to investigate it, they start to troubleshoot the site, and they find out that we as a vendor didn't create a mobile-friendly version of the site, or we didn't include some SEO optimization, and this impedes their search results for now. And they will be very unhappy with us, and most probably they will complain. Okay, moving on to the next section, exclusions. And that's another critical point of scope statement, because it's happening a bit later in the project planning. That's when we understood what's the goal of the project, we know what are the main deliverables. Now we want to specify that these pieces of this product, in this case, will not be included in this project. So things like production of videos for the homepage. We mentioned it multiple times, but we are saying that the creation, recording of these videos and editing them is not on our side. Actually, we'll go even further and we'll assume that customers will provide us these videos. Sales page for Career Accelerator. Again, if you go like deeper into the website, you may have other sections of it, big pages like this product page for my main program. And this is out of scope right now for this project. We want to be very specific because sometimes customers assume that it's all included, but it's not. And then in the middle of the project, it will be very hard to negotiate inclusion or exclusion of these parts. Again, content creation for the blog posts. We exclude it from the project. We create only the structure, the technical capabilities to add these blog posts, but we don't write blog posts themselves. On-page optimization, same goes. We do the backend stuff where we provide metadata for these web pages, but we don't do anything on the page in the content itself. Ongoing website maintenance post-launch. Another critical point, which stems mostly from the contract. We're saying that, okay, we'll create the website, we'll deploy it to production environment, we'll give you all the credentials to administer it and create content, but after that we are done. Maybe some bug fixing, if something critical happens, then we will have to fix it. But ongoing maintenance is out of the scope of this project and this contract. Integration with third-party marketing or CRM systems other than basic form data storage. So again, we want to ensure that customers don't expect us to integrate with all third-party tools that they need. We're just focusing on website, homepage, and this form to collect emails. All right, next, constraints. That's also an important part, where we list out what are the project constraints in terms of budget, time, and any technical aspects. So project must be completed within 8 weeks. Budget for the project is fixed and must not exceed $20,000. Website must comply with relevant accessibility standards. So this is an example of a requirement constraint. Like, this is a must-have feature. For example, let's assume this website is specifically for people with some disabilities. Maybe they have some problems with vision, so they have to use accessibility features. And if we don't implement them, then the site is not that useful for our target audience. You may imagine another constraint from technical or business perspective when, for example, we create a new website and it's a corporate website and we must deploy it. And there will be some constraint to say that, okay, during working hours or business hours, we should not disrupt the work. Therefore, you can deploy this site only during certain periods of time. Or if you can imagine a big website like Facebook or something, they have multiple data centers that feed this website to different locations. In this case, most probably we'll be deploying the website geo by geo, so for different areas of the world, there will be different constraints when we can do it and when we cannot do it. Next, assumptions. So we assume a few things for this project, and we put these assumptions inside our project plan without confirming or verifying it for 100%. So to finish this project and deliver it on time, we assume that the content for the homepage, including text and videos, will be provided by ITPM School. So what it means is that we are technical experts, we are not marketing experts. We can put it all together in one website which will work correctly, but we don't know what to write, what should be in these videos, so we assume that you will provide us. That's our main assumption. If you don't provide this information, the project will be blocked, or it will not reach its project's objectives. Hosting and domain services are already arranged and will be managed by ITPM School. Again, we don't want to create a website on our companies or our personal properties. We want to create it right away in the customer's environment that they that they use, that they have access to, and which is their property. Stakeholders will be available for feedback and approvals within 48 hours of the submission. This is another assumption that comes from mostly experience, because if you look at it, there are a lot of things going on here. And these project deliverables, these are only final versions of deliverables. But if you know the software development lifecycle and if you have the experience, you understand that design will never happen in one iteration. So designers will come up with the first draft, you will show it to the customers, they will look at it, they say, I need to change these colors, I need to change that. You go back to designers, they change it, you have second version. They look at it, oh, okay, now it doesn't look good because these two sections don't align, it's not following corporate guidelines or stuff like that. You go back and you get the third version, and then they approve it. So based on this assumption that every iteration or every interaction with the customers will happen within 48 hours. And our plan will be based on that. So if we deliver you something from this list, you will get back to us in 2 days or less. Ideally, you do it instantly. All right, there you have it. That's an example of scope statement, very simple, and even for a complex project, I recommend that you keep it as simple as this. Okay, one more thing about project deliverables. In this case, I describe them as a list, but if you have less technical stakeholders and project owners and they don't know all this terminology, sometimes you'll have to describe them in more detail. So for example, what does a staging mean, what does production environment mean, and so on. So you will describe it in more details so that they have a clear picture of the project. And again, I'll repeat it. The goal of this document is to ensure that project owners and stakeholders understand what the project team will create and how this will help us to achieve the business objective or project goals. And in the long run, project stakeholders need to read this and sign it off and say that, yeah, we agree that if you implement this, like in the long term, we'll get to the project's objectives. All right, there you have it. And I recommend that in any case, if you create a project scope statement, you keep it as simple as this one. You don't need to be very fancy with anything technically complex here. You need to help stakeholders understand the scope of work. Likewise, remember that you don't have to copy and paste a lot of information here. You can have the summary of any of this information, and you can link to the documents that have all the details, all the requirements, and so on. If you are an ambitious IT project manager, check the resources in the description. And if you want an in-depth understanding of project scope management, watch this video now. I'll see you there.